Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for your time this evening. My name is Stuart Rye. I'm the Managing Director of a company called FSE Fire Safety Systems. I'm knowledgeable on everything but qualified at nothing. That's my job as Managing Director. Which is why I've brought Mark Appleton. Here's Mark. He's the Operations Manager on the mechanical side of our company. And John Coles, who is the Engineering Manager on mechanical. Very technically knowledgeable. So as we go through the presentation, which you'll see on the next slide, if you've got any questions, John will hopefully be able to give you all the answers. We've been invited here this evening on behalf of Woodheads on the joint initiative with A1 Housing to talk to you about the effectiveness of sprinkler systems in a residential and domestic environment. I don't know whether anybody's got any direct experience with sprinkler systems. We were just having a conversation earlier. Anybody come into contact with them?
My work's full of my work.
Your works, so on a commercial environment, not necessarily in a residential or a domestic environment. Okay, well hopefully the outcome of this presentation is that you'll know a little bit more by the time we leave this evening. So the agenda is presentation, questions and answers. Well, the way I tend to do it is questions and answers as we go along. So if you've got anything that comes to mind or anything you want to bring up or discuss, then shout it out. It's fairly informal. And after this presentation, we've got a trailer which you may have seen outside, and we're going to give you a live fire sprinkler demonstration. And with a bit of luck, it should work. Just to give you a bit of background information, you know, why FSE, why we're here. Maybe some more mature gentlemen here this evening will remember FSE of days of old, which used to stand for Fire Safety Equipment. We used to supply Hall Matro cutting equipment to the fire service. The company was sold in 2004. I re-established it in 2005 as part of a management buyout. And we grew back into portable fire extinguishers, and we now do a lot of systems work right across the county, as well as the UK. From suppression systems, fire extinguishers, emergency lights, fire alarm systems, and more latterly into security systems. So I believe the company has the necessary experience in the fire systems market. When we started in 2005, we employed 3 people. Now we employ around about 38, 39. So we've grown quite substantially over the last 11 years. Big thing that we drive for is qualifications and accreditations. So we're ISO 9001, BAFE, BAFSA, RSA accredited, all the logos you see across the bottom there, and we're also going for the LPCB approval as well, which is more akin to sprinklers and the work that we've been doing more latterly over the last 3 or 4 years. Sprinklers, if I'm honest, hasn't been a particularly big part of our business, but as the legislation has been changing, we've grown into that market and it's now forming quite a big part of what we actually do as a business. Some of our clients include people like Capital One, East Midlands Airport, East Midlands Ambulance Service, Nottingham City Council, names that you're probably familiar with. So we've got some good quality clients on board. We go as far north as Glen Eagles Hotel. And on a national basis, our teams cover people such as Café Rouge, Bella Italia, Nando's, with different elements of fire safety, from portable fire extinguishers through to alarm systems, suppression systems. Fire safety in summary, you know, we could spend a whole evening talking about it, but in terms of how we summarise it as a business, prevention, don't have a fire. Detection, have early warning of fire. Protection, ensure persons can escape. And intervention, stop fire growth quickly. What are sprinklers? Well, the slide gives you a very brief summary. What are sprinklers? Well, you've mentioned ones in the commercial environment. Sprinklers have been around since the 19th century. Was introduced into a factory, I think in 1891 from memory, a piano factory in the United States, Connecticut. Somebody came up with the bright idea of putting in a sprinkler system. And the first sprinkler system came into the UK in early 1900s in Druid Lane, I think, in London. And again, it was to protect assets within a factory environment. So they've been around a long time. The designs have changed slightly and the heads have changed slightly, but the main driving principle is still the same, which is delivering water to a risk area. They've now got a proven track record. Traditionally, it's been for property protection, but that now is changing. And the life safety benefits are now actually recognised more latterly. And there's been a dramatic reduction in fire losses. So it's a system that works if it's correctly installed. What do they do? Well, you've got, and John's going to talk in a little bit more detail about this later, but they're independent heat sensing elements which will detect a fire. It will raise an alarm, either visual or audible. It'll automatically apply water to a fire area from a tank or a town's main, depending on the pressure. Makes the designer of the sprinkler system decide whether it needs the tank system installed within the building, which is a consideration for us because quite often in domestic and residential markets there's a lack of space because people are moving into the roof void areas, and quite often you can't get the pressure on the outlying areas on the town's main. What do? They prevent flashover development. They reduce the toxic effects of smoke, so helping to protect the occupants within the building. They increase the evacuation time, and they allow fire and rescue service more time to actually tackle the fire. And overall, they help to reduce fire damage. Typical scenario, it's a very simple graph we've got there. 0 to 10 minutes. Effectively, you've got your viable level there. There's the light on that. In terms of sustaining life. You've got your fire starting here. Your smoke alarm generally activates somewhere around about here, 1 to 2 minutes. Fire brigade get notification around about 3 minutes, and it can be sometimes up to 10 minutes before the first water is actually on the fire. And as you can see, in terms of the rising graph, life isn't going to be sustainable past this point here. In terms of a typical fire scenario where you've got a sprinkler in a building, you've got your same viable level here. Fire's starting still at this point here, but the sprinkler is generally operating around about 5 minutes. It is a bit of an outside time, if I'm honest with you, but at this point here, 5 to 6 minutes into the fire, the sprinkler system should be bringing it under control. So there's quite a massive difference in terms of having a building with a sprinkler system as against having a building without a sprinkler system. And effectively, it is sustaining life. UK sprinkler standards. I was going to touch on this a little bit later, but unfortunately, creeping into our industry, when they see a commercial opportunity, you do get some less professional operators. And so any sprinkler company that's worth its salt should be operating to these standards. So BS 9251 applies for residential premises, so that's buildings of or multiple occupancy and care homes, and domestic premises, single family homes. And so any professional sprinkler company should be designing and installing the sprinkler system within that building to that particular standard. If it's not, how can you guarantee that it's actually going to work when it's supposed to? And BS EN 12845 is for commercial and industrial buildings. So there's two very clear standards between domestic and residential and commercial industrial buildings. And sprinkler companies, whether it's FSE or many others in the marketplace, should be working to these particular standards to ensure that the systems do what they're supposed to do. What seems to be gathering pace more in our market is these water mist systems to cover not only electrical areas, but also water mist is appearing now in restaurants in terms of cooking oil fires. But because it's very fine droplets of mist, there's no conductivity, but it's got excellent cooling properties to help break the fire triangle. So at the moment as it stands, there's no standard for water mist systems, there's just guidance. And so until there is, everybody is really working to these particular standards here. But I think you'll find over the next 5 to 10 years, especially water mist systems will be coming in more because it is, as it says, a mist as against a deluge with water. Differences, residential or domestic. So a residential system will be required for any property where the residence is shared living space or access. That's typically where you'll find a residential system being asked for now. Generally, it's driven by the building control officer, can be the fire officer, sometimes the insurance company. But it's where there's a perceived risk to life within that building. A domestic system incorporates loft conversions and new built houses. So these houses that we passed just down the road, very much in fashion, you know, where you've got your converted attic area and you're looking to protect the escape route. And from January the 1st in 2016, automatic fire sprinkler systems will be compulsory in all new and converted residential properties in Wales. So we're expecting a huge flurry of inquiries, hopefully. We're based in Nottingham, it's not too far away, but it's quite a significant change. It's already happened in Scotland. The question I asked at a recent BAFSA conference, which is to do with our industry, is will it happen in England? And they believe not. The reason being is it's working quite successfully within England as it stands. And they don't think they're going to have to enforce any particular legislation to help drive it on.
So in a fire situation then, you're going to get the temperature rise to 58 degrees and then you're going to get the cover cap pop off. At 68 degrees, the sprinkler head will start to discharge water. The water is fed through the pipework, through your control valve section here, which will activate the flow switch connected to an audible alarm. And you also have the main stop valve for the system there, obviously to be left in the on position at all times. We've got a few different types of head on this system. You've got the flat plate head with the drop down pendant there. The standard domed head that we've seen just now. Also have a standard pendant head and the sidewall head to give a fan style spray. All of these heads will activate at 68 degrees Celsius.
So some of which John's already described to you, how do they work? It's a dedicated water supply that provides the water to the sprinkler head. Flow rates are carefully calculated in order to be able to control the fire. And that is that's a very, very important factor when you're dealing with a professional company. You'll get those calculations as part of the handover pack. Whereas if there are, dare I say it, some plumbers doing it on the back of a fag packet, there's no guarantee the system's going to deliver the amount of water that's actually required.
No, we had that recent one just come in yesterday, didn't we?
Yeah. The water supply is controlled by the main stop valve, which John has described, and that one there is typically a commercial system as against the residential system. And for safety reasons, the manual stop valve should always be locked open, and only authorised personnel should be close it. Installation considerations. Unfortunately, some building control officers inform the clients very late in the build that they need a sprinkler system. So we would always advise, think about a sprinkler system and whether you need one early. We get a number of phone calls whereby ceilings are being closed off, and it's very challenging to start retrofitting pipe work to a new build. Check the water supplies, which is the first thing we do, because if there isn't enough incoming pressure on the main, we've got to then look at putting a tank system in, as I mentioned earlier. Use a trusted installer. Liaise with the fire and rescue service, so liaise with yourselves if necessary. We always advise using qualified engineers and also understand the importance of future maintenance, that these systems should be maintained either 6 monthly or on an annual basis in the residential arena. And keep heads operable, free from paint. Quite often these heads here, they'll be painted over. 5 or 6 years from now, they'll redecorate the ceiling and they'll be painted over, and that immediately compromises the integrity of how the system will perform, or not, as the case may be. In terms of what you guys do, firefighting considerations, on arrival, a member of crew must be sent to the manual stop valve. The manual stop valve should be opened if it's found closed, because otherwise the system isn't going to operate. If it's having regular service and maintenance, it should always be open. The valve should not be closed except on the express interest of the incident commander. Additional water should not be extracted from the same service main that feeds the installation, for obvious reasons. And although sprinklers have appeared to extinguish the fire, careful examination is required to ensure that the fire is out. Again, picking up on the point that John made. Fairly obvious sort of stuff, but quite often, we'll get to domestic and residential installations, and for some unknown reason, somebody's turned the water supply off. It does happen. When the incident commander is satisfied that the manual stop valve, fire is extinguished, the manual stop valve may be closed, sprinkler pumps can be shut down, and then the mopping up operations can commence and the system reinstated. So typically we'd get a call out to come and reinstate the system and make sure that the heads that had gone were actually replaced. You've seen many fires, you've seen the consequences of fire. This is a building that wasn't sprinklered. Fire started in the kitchen area. It swept very quickly through the upstairs area of the building. They lost the roof, and the point of origin was actually in the kitchen. So that's the sort of devastation you're going to get with a building or a residential application where there is no sprinkler system. On the flip side, here's a house that's had a fire. It's been an external fire, so it originated just here. You can see the smoke spread. I'm sure it was nothing to do with these guys here sitting on the wall. The sprinkler performed better than expected. There were no injuries to the occupants. This was back in Wiltshire in 2004. The property remained occupied whilst the repairs were being carried out. And that's the damage to the kitchen area. So not very significant at all. Studley Green, back in 2010. This was a living room fire. The occupants were asleep in the next bedroom. They were completely oblivious that there'd been a fire. It was fairly obvious what was the cause. The neighbours heard the sprinkler alarm go off because the actual tenants had disabled the smoke alarm for whatever reason. One head operated, no rehousing was required, and there again you can see where the fire spread was, but the sprinkler system did its job and extinguished the fire. Cheltenham, student accommodation, back in 2011. It was a chip pan fire at 10 p.m, because we know how students like the chips. It was a recently extended 3-storey block. It had been open the week before. The sprinklers were fitted due to, or to encourage boundary separation. And again, sprinkler system did its job and it was quickly extinguished, and the amount of damage was absolutely minimal. Callermount in Sheffield is quite an interesting case study. It's not one that we've been directly involved with. It's been one through our organisation BAFSA that we belong to. And for a long time there's been a debate, I suppose, going on between different parties on the basis that they want sprinkler systems retrofitted. And the first, I suppose, challenge is you've got a lot of elderly residents. They don't want to move out. It's their home. They don't want people disturbing them and ripping up floorboards and ceilings to retrofit a sprinkler system. And so the industry has worked quite hard to make sure that now, with changes in design, we can actually retrofit quite successfully sprinkler systems into these high-rise type buildings to help protect the occupants. And so therefore this was a project that was successfully completed. I think the average cost per flat was around about £1,100. So the changes in the design that we were now allowed to do under BS 9251 made it very cost effective for the organisation that instigated this. And the residents were extremely happy with the results. They felt safer. The typical installation in each flat took round about 1.5 to 2 days. And so it was a good positive result for everybody. And of course, again, for the fire service, you know, high-rise buildings are always a big challenge. Additional benefits, well, sprinkler systems can form part of the total fire safety package, and the design freedoms that I've already mentioned allow us to have increased in compartment size, reduced passive fire protection measures, and increases in travel distances. And there's also the reduced risk to building users, including yourselves, increased environmental protection because the fire is being suppressed, and reduced insurance premiums for the building owners. So there's a lot of additional benefits that installing sprinkler systems achieve. Reliability, well, 93% of them operate when they're supposed to do so. 97% are effective, so they did what they were supposed to do. 60% of fires are controlled by a maximum 4 heads. 98% of fires in dwellings are controlled by one head. The property loss is around about 85%, and there's a 1 in 500,000 chance of an accidental discharge, assuming the system's been serviced, and only 1 in 16 million chance of an accidental discharge due to manufacturing defects. So there's a lot to achieve by installing either domestic or residential sprinkler systems. So, in summary, you've got this, or you've got this. And we believe we know what most people would prefer.
Smoke detector. The wind's a bit high. It's really blowing that around. There we go. So already, you see the water's actually taken enough smoke out of the air to stop the smoke detector.